I'm not a doctor, neither are you. We're not doing diagnoses, but is there something wrong with Joe Biden?
I think there is. I'm not sure if we can really tell if it's that much worse than it was 10 years ago, and we just didn't have an opportunity to see him in action as much as we could have. Remember that when he was nominated as the vice president and Sarah Palin was nominated to be John McCain's running mate, the Obama campaign abruptly pulled Biden out of the public eye for 3 or 4 weeks. They kept him under wraps. That didn't happen to Sarah Palin. She was immediately thrust into the public eye. She had to answer questions, do interviews, and Republicans never would have gotten away with something like that. But the Obama campaign kept Biden under wraps for quite a while. Now, perhaps his memory lapses are a little worse now, and perhaps some of his other habits and little tics on stage are worse and more noticeable. But he's never exactly been smooth in public. 98% of the time he's okay. And sometimes he's very strong. He sometimes has facts and figures at his disposal. Sometimes he has a very clear presentation of ideas and even makes fine ideological points. And then he falls apart the other 2% of the time. The question facing voters isn't necessarily where is Joe Biden's mental capacity today? It's where is it going to be a year from now, 2 years from now? Can he actually function across 4 years of a presidency in which he's going to cross the threshold into 80 years old, into his 9th decade on the planet? He's been active in politics since the 1960s, and that is a very, very long time. Occasionally it catches up with him. There was one debate where he was referring to a record player, a device nobody under the age of 30 has ever seen unless it's in a vintage vinyl store and one of those newly fashionable devices you might pick up, or in the days of retail when you might have picked up at Best Buy or something like that as a novelty item. But nobody's really used one. No one has a record collection. So he really is not entirely there. The question is for Democrats, can they do anything about it? It becomes very difficult to do something about it now because it's so soon after Bernie Sanders was still a viable candidate for the nomination. And anything the party would do to get rid of Biden would be seen as unfair by the Sanders people because they, after all, felt that their guy should have been the nominee and is at least in second place. If they wait too long, it becomes much harder to pull off a switch because they're going to have the convention, presumably in August. There's going to be a nomination process. Procedurally, it gets more difficult to replace a candidate after that process if he is in fact ratified as the nominee. So they've got a window of time, perhaps in the summer, between, let's say, July 4th and the convention in mid-August, when they can conceivably switch him with whoever his vice presidential candidate is going to be. I think on May 1st, next week, he is going to announce a committee to choose his running mate. That could begin the process of moving him out of the race. It depends how loyal the party establishment is to Biden. It depends what the alternatives are. This is going to be something that the leadership of the Democratic Party has to finesse very carefully. I do not put anything beyond them. I don't think the rules matter. We've seen before that they're willing to rig the primary against a candidate they don't want. They did it against Bernie Sanders in 2016. They united legally, perhaps, against Bernie Sanders in 2020. They will do whatever it takes to be competitive in November. If you're a Republican, you can watch this and be entertained somewhat, but I wouldn't find it reassuring at all. Joe Biden cannot beat Donald Trump in the state he's in, and therefore he will either be bolstered by a very strong vice presidential candidate or he will be replaced.
That's an excerpt from my daily show, the Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.